Hi, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple minutes before we get started. Oh, there you go. You just brightened your screen. Perfect.
Very good.
That's great. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
Had to do a little tweaking on this side, but it looks good now.
We'll just wait maybe one more minute. We'll get started.
All right, I think for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. We will continue to monitor the waiting room and let people in as they come. Welcome to our second annual New Year Wellness Series, backed by popular demand and packed with meaningful guidance on spiritual, relational, emotional, nutritional, physical, and mental wellness. I'm Sarah Green, the wellness consultant here at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at FAU Medicine. At the Marcus Institute, our approach is a holistic, patient-focused approach to healthcare and wellness. Our physicians treat the whole person by examining everything that makes up a patient's health, including factors that can lead to disease, affect nutrition, exercise, stress, and other lifestyle factors. Ultimately, patients and physicians are partners in healing and wellness. The Marcus Institute is pleased to co-sponsor this series with our friends at the Robin Rubin Center for Happiness and Life Enhancement. The center is housed in the Sandler School of Social Work within the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice at FAU. They offer weekly online meditation sessions, bi-monthly in-person yoga classes, and monthly wellness workshops. All of their offerings are free of charge and open to everyone, students, staff, faculty, friends, and family. We too at the Marcus Institute also offer a host of free wellness programs. Both schedules are available on our respective websites. We're posting links in the chat now and invite you to learn more about both the Marcus Institute and Robin Rubin Center and make plans to join us again in the near future. So today's speaker, Dr. Collins, it is my honor to introduce him. Dr. Branson Collins is a triple board certified physician who is board certified in anesthesiology, pain medicine, and anti-aging and regenerative medicine. In addition to being a spinal and musculoskeletal interventional expert, it's a mouthful, he also applies the principles of integrative medicine to optimize the health and well-being of his patients. Dr. Collins received his Bachelor of Arts in Biology at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and completed his Doctor of Medicine at UMDNJ, New Jersey Medical School. He was chief resident at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, where he completed his residency in anesthesiology, as well as an advanced fellowship in pain management. He also is an advanced fellowship trained physician in anti-aging, metabolic, and functional medicine through the American Academy of Anti-Aging and Regenerative Medicine. Dr. Collins has served his country proudly as a veteran in the New Jersey Army National Guard. He is a resident of South Florida and in his off time enjoys spending time with his wife and 2 daughters. He is also a sports enthusiast and actively practices Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the rank of a purple belt. Dr. Collins, welcome, welcome, welcome. So we're going to hand it over to Dr. Collins for his presentation today, which I assure you will find informational and engaging. And if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and Dr. Collins will address those at the end of his presentation. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. Can everybody see my shared slide? Can I get a confirmation?
We cannot see it yet.
Let's do share screen. Share screen. There we go. This will be better. There?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to provide this series, and just a little bit more about what brought us here today. The use of integrative approaches to medicine are really coming to the forefront of medicine today. And a lot of what we're doing in integrative medicine is we're looking at a very comprehensive and integrated approach to taking care of the person and really doing a precision approach to managing them. And what we're finding too, when it comes to chronic illnesses, diseases, and even aging, what we're finding is that inflammation can be at the root of this. And I'm going to be going over with you today these concepts of inflammation leading to aging, and this term called inflammaging. I'm going to describe it and how it's different from what we're seeing with acute inflammation, and also go into how low-grade chronic inflammation can be driving a lot of the things that are leading to things like cancer, cancers, neurodegenerative conditions, and even chronic pain. We're going to talk about things like diet, lifestyle, the importance there, and also talk about some interventions that we can do to really help to slow that aging process and help to reverse inflammation. I really love this quote by Aristotle that health is a matter of choice, not a mystery of chance. And today in medicine, people really are getting more empowered now with their own health. And they're finding that when they're really looking at their diet, their lifestyle choices, that they are actually making a difference in terms of their numbers when they're getting their labs, and also finding that their energy and resilience is much higher when they're making appropriate lifestyle choices. So let's discuss a little bit about aging. So there's certain theories of aging, and one of those is that it's programmed. So we're programmed by our DNA that we're just going to be aging at a certain rate, and there's not much that can be done other than that built-in program, and it's kind of destined. And there's also this other theory that's more involved with the damage over time that happens when cells are really going through their processes of replicating and repairing, and that can actually lead to inflammation downstream. And there's damage over time that happens where those repair mechanisms get slower and less efficient as we age. So with looking at inflammation, what's the difference between acute inflammation and what we're finding with more of this chronic low-grade inflammation? And really what we're finding with acute inflammation, that's somebody gets a cut and cells go to the area and they're really working to heal that area. And there's different cell types. You don't have to worry too much about the terminology, but cells come together to really try to repair that tissue. And what's interesting about the chronic inflammation is that that process is undergoing, and it continues to undergo at a certain rate even after that insult is gone. So it's as if the cut is still there, even though the cut has been already healed. And for some reason, people are still having inflammation that's really driving aging of their cells. And in this process, what's happening is that we're getting more reactive species of oxygen that's really disrupting DNA, and it's leading to things like cancer, it's leading to things like nerve damage. And these processes can be measured in integrative medicine, and you can actually track people's aging process with different metrics. So if you take anything away from this presentation, this is one that I find is very, very good depiction of what's happening. So we have on the left side, we have sources of inflammation, and on the far right, we have the downstream effects. So we know that in America, the average body mass index is increasing. We're finding that there's more fat to muscle composition. Things like insulin resistance and diabetes are actually increasing. The amount of physical inactivity is actually going up because people are more sedentary in their jobs. We're finding a lot more remote jobs where people actually aren't even having to get up and go to the office as much. And also, you may be hearing more and more about imbalances of what's called the gut microbiome and those organisms that are in our gut. And what we're finding is there may be associations between different conditions in every aspect of medicine, whether it's diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and even in mood disorders and depression, where there's associations and correlations between these gut organisms being imbalanced and then presenting downstream as some of these diseases. And there's also exposures to toxins. And I always do express that toxic exposures oftentimes aren't looked at in traditional medicine. And we're exposed to toxins all the time. Every time we consume fish, there's levels of heavy metals that can be in certain fish types, especially things like shark, tuna, high levels of things like mercury. And those can have significant impact on inflammation, also affect cell energy. And through that process, what ends up happening is we end up getting derangements in our metabolism. We start not being able to mobilize our blood sugar and put it into the cell. And that's really what insulin resistance and diabetes is. And through that process also, we start building up more toxins, and that leads to things like fatty liver, which also forward feeds more inflammation because we're not getting rid of those toxins as well. And then what we're finding, and this is one of the parts of medicine that's really fascinating, is that as this chronic inflammation is undergoing, certain cells are actually getting put into a state where they're not really replicating as readily. They're getting put into this kind of pause. And what's happening there is something called immunosenescence. And there's certain strategies that you can actually reactivate those cells in integrative medicine, which is pretty exciting. And I want to go into one of the important parts about this inflammation and one of the potential targets that we look at with inflammation. And that's the cell energy sources called the mitochondria. And these were cell organelles that have been incorporated into our own cells that really help to produce ATP and energy. And what's interesting about this mitochondrial theory of aging is that the effective cell activity that's happening leads to more and more reactive oxygen species that actually can disrupt these mitochondria and produce these radical oxygens that actually can cause destruction of certain subunits of proteins and different acids and also membranes. And one of the secrets to health is, can you keep your membranes intact, whether that's the membranes of your brain, the membranes of your gut, the membranes of your heart. And what we're finding with inflammation is that those membranes actually get disrupted. And that disruption can lead to the cells not functioning as well. And there's lots of associations between that and cardiovascular disease and also things like Alzheimer's. And are these mitochondria important? So these are just a list of things that have been associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. Everything from mood disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, Alzheimer's, epilepsy, even chronic pain, and also Parkinson's, strokes, heart disease, chronic pain like widespread pain like fibromyalgia, diabetes. And what ends up happening over time is this inflammation continues to cascade. We actually get a decline in our ability of our blood vessels to really oxygenate our tissues. and then our blood vessels become more rigid. And then we get a defective nature of how our structure of our blood vessels are. And that actually leads to things like heart attack and stroke. And it's happening at a cellular level. And it ends up over time as it really starts insulting the system that it presents as things like Alzheimer's. So one of the important things that we're finding when we're looking at inflammation is how do we protect the brain? So we know with the brain, what we want is those membranes to stay intact. And what we're finding is that when the brain is actually aging rapidly, that the connections of the brain actually get disrupted. So this was actually a study that looked at mice that were fed high-fat diets when they were in the neonate and also in adolescent periods. And what it found is actually decreased the number of stem cells that were available to help repair. And also it ended up creating more and more inflammation that they could track with certain things like this NF-kappa. And they looked at these things and they said, wait a minute, there may be an association between this and some of the things we're seeing with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia. So what they found when they were really looking at, well, how are we protecting things like the brain and how are we protecting from inflammation? One of the things that they found is that a Mediterranean-style eating plan has been found to be very effective as an anti-inflammatory diet. And pretty much the Mediterranean-style eating really limits red meat. It improves the amount of anti-inflammatory foods, things like whole grains that are higher in protein, fruits and vegetables that are bright colored, the legumes, fatty fish, and also healthy oils, and minimizes added sugars and is not processed with a bunch of preservatives. And what they found is that this style of eating plan was very high in antioxidants, so it actually helped buffer some of those oxidative things that were happening where the cell was having those reactive oxygens, so that the cells weren't taking them on, the organs were getting protected. So things like berries, nuts, and seeds help actually to reduce that inflammation. With exercise, we find that regular exercise, especially low to moderate impact, can be very anti-inflammatory in its action. And people who exercise on a regular basis actually had less of these inflammatory molecules around. And resistance training in particular was shown to really reduce systemic inflammation. So that's really doing weight training. One of the things that we encourage with a lot of our patients that come see us is actually to do tracking of their recovery and also their sleep. And what we're finding is a lot of people are actually over stressing their bodies when they exercise. So some of these wearables that you may know that are out there can actually help you to really determine if your exercise regimen can be lighter or if it actually can be heavier. And we're getting more objective with that. And it really started with professional athletes, but now we're using it for the general population too. Is sleep important for inflammation? It is. We found that adequate sleep is critical for maintaining good health and preventing the inflammation process. When we don't sleep well, and really the goal of sleep is 8 hours of sleep per day, which for many of us can be challenging, but as close to that as we can get. But when people have had decreased sleep quality or quantity, there's increase in these inflammatory molecules. And actually, we see signs of inflammation all throughout the body. Now, when people have good sleeping patterns and good sleep hygiene, that means shutting down the electronics at least an hour before we go to sleep, not stimulating our retina with bright lights at least an hour before we sleep, and also allowing ourselves to kind of wind down a few hours before we actually are trying to go to sleep is really important. A lot of us, and I have this counseling all the time with my patients, a lot of us just kind of keep throughout the day, go hard throughout the day, and then all of a sudden it's 9 o'clock and we lay down after doing a high intensity exercise, and then we expect to be able to transfer into sleep mode efficiently, and it's really challenging to do so. And that's why we encourage things like doing meditation, deep breathing exercises actually throughout the day, so that you can start working on that rest and relaxed nervous system early. And that can be really helpful to help improve sleep quality and also help with this inflammation. So are there nutrients that can help us with targeting inflammation? And there are, and we know this actually looking at cell biology, and this has been around for a very long time. And that the cell physiology, in terms of things that are really needed to make sure that cells are functioning at an optimal level, things like the B vitamins, things like magnesium, things like alpha lipoic acid, which is a great antioxidant, and even CoQ10. So these are all things that are able to be measured in integrative medicine. We're able to actually measure people's CoQ10 levels, which is important for things like their heart and their brain, and also their ability to transfer energy appropriately in their cells. And some of the most prescribed medications, the statins, we know actually deplete this CoQ10. And in doing so, the people who end up having pain in their muscles oftentimes have to transition to different medications, or they're then put on CoQ10, which has been found to be helpful with that muscle breakdown. One of the conversations I always have with people if they're on statins is the importance of actually measuring their CoQ10 levels, which can be done by blood. All the regular labs can do it. There's also specialized functional testing to look at it. You can actually get objective amounts of if they're actually deficient in CoQ10, so you know exactly how much you need to measure. And that's a general rule for most nutrients. You don't really know how much you need unless you measure, right? Or else we're just guessing. Does everybody need a high level or high doses of B vitamins? Not everybody needs it. Does everybody need a certain subform of B vitamins, like methylated B vitamins? Not everyone does. So there's particular testing that can be done to see what kind of B vitamins somebody need, how much do they need, and then do they actually have an appropriate feedback in their system to show that their B vitamins are getting absorbed when they are taking them. A very popular one for a lot of people in the room, this is actually part of the Mediterranean diet. Wine is actually included in the Mediterranean diet eating plan, which I find when I'm talking to my patients, they're very happy about that. Obviously, keeping it within moderate or low ranges. But one of the major things that we have found that can actually work on decreasing inflammation is resveratrol. And this resveratrol is found in red wine. It's also found in peanuts and berries. And this is a study that actually looked at resveratrol and saw that it lowered inflammation based on certain pathways. And also they found that it actually worked to decrease some of that amyloid production that we see in people with Alzheimer's. So they were doing this in animal models, and they saw that the animals that were given the resveratrol actually formed less of these plaques in their brain, and their stem cells of their brain actually were more reliable and able to actually repair better. So they found that this is actually not only protect the heart, protect the kidneys, but it also was protective against obesity. It was protective against getting diabetes, and also protective against cancer. And what's very interesting now is, and these kind of molecules can get compounded and even given intravenously. So we're actually giving intravenous resveratrol for people to actually help with some of these processes. And we do have people that are coming in with your earlier signs of things like brain fog and things like not sleeping well. And when you give them resveratrol either orally as an agent in terms of a comprehensive program, or even give them infusions to bypass the gut and giving it IV, people actually do very well. And you can actually see their markers of inflammation actually decrease as you're managing them over time. So other important things to really look at when looking at inflammation and targeting it is really seeing what is the level of somebody's ability to get rid of toxins. So we know we're exposed to different toxins, whether it's in the air, whether it's pollution, whether there's certain things in the groundwater. And one of the things that these toxins work on is they start really impacting our liver and lower something called glutathione. And glutathione is a major antioxidant that's produced by the liver that really helps to buffer some of these toxins so that the organs don't get damaged. The challenge is some people genetically don't make glutathione well, because you can actually make glutathione you can extract it for certain foods, and your body makes it from the liver. Some people genetically don't make it as well. So it's actually good to know those people, because those are the people you actually measure the level, and you can increase that level by supplementing glutathione or even supplementing its precursor called NAC. And also important things for that pathway is really making sure that things like their selenium levels and their kind of micronutrients are also supported, because minerals are very important as cofactors in the process of getting rid of toxins. And we talked a little bit about the B vitamins before, but One in particular called riboside is a form of B3. And this was actually found in animal models to not only improve cell energy, but also to reduce inflammation across the board. And a lot of these B vitamins work in conjunction. So a lot of times when people need B vitamins, they don't just need B12. And I find that a lot of people come and they're like, oh, I'm taking B12. And you ask them about, well, what about your B3, your B6, your B1, et cetera? And they're like, well, I'm not, I haven't really heard that I need to take those. And it's like, well, we don't know unless we measure. And if we find that they're low, then we actually know what kind of complex and what concentrations we need to give for people. And it's able to be very protective, especially from a cardiovascular standpoint, because a lot of people, about 50% of individuals have genetics where they don't actually metabolize their B vitamins well. They have a couple of sluggish pathways that are involved with there. And one of the markers of inflammation called homocysteine gets elevated in these cases. And that's actually associated with cardiovascular disease and also associated with neurovascular disease. So it's very important to have all those things measured, and then you can get that homocysteine optimized based on the B vitamins. One very important inflammaging tool also is melatonin. And a lot of people think of melatonin as a sleep agent, but it's really not a sleep agent. It is formed usually at nighttime by that pineal gland that's in our brain. But what we find is actually one of the best antioxidants for the brain that we know on Earth. And can you measure melatonin levels? You can. Is it done through traditional medicine? It's not. It's usually measured in saliva, and you actually get a sample in the middle of the night, and you have somebody actually give a salivary sample. You can actually see what their melatonin levels are. One of the things that I always caution people is that melatonin shouldn't just be taken at high dosages for a long period of time. And one of those reasons is if you look at the feedback with melatonin, because for every reaction, there's always an equal and opposite reaction. One of the things that happens when people take melatonin is that they lower their serotonin levels. And if you've heard of serotonin is obviously that happy hormone, that happy kind of neurochemical that's involved. And a lot of the antidepressants that are out there work on that pathway. So you can imagine if somebody's taking high levels of melatonin over time, that there's a pathway by which that can in and of itself make them depressed. So that's why it's important to measure melatonin levels. And also you can even measure some of the metabolites of serotonin. So very important things. We also saw this significantly helpful. There was a lot of research that was coming out during the COVID-19 pandemic that those that were taking melatonin actually had a less likely incidence of actually testing positive for COVID-19. Now, correlation doesn't necessarily mean that it's preventative. However, these numbers were actually looking at 60,000 individuals, and the people that were taking melatonin were very significantly protected against testing positive for COVID-19. And you may ask yourself, does melatonin actually have some antiviral properties in literature? And it does. It also has antibacterial properties. And then also one of the things that is going to be one of the hallmarks of our time is really taking care of people who have this long haul COVID syndrome. And what we're finding in the syndrome is that people are actually melatonin deficient. So one of the things that we do is we measure that, and we also get them onto melatonin, which can seem to help a lot of the neural symptoms that happen with the anxiety and the sleep disturbance that happens with long haul COVID. Curcumin is also very, very useful in managing inflammation. It's a natural compound found in turmeric. And what it really does is it helps to regulate the inflammation in the brain. So one of the cells that are involved with inflammation in the brain is something called the microglia. And these microglia act as immune cells to help prevent pathogens from causing damage. One of the challenges that happens is, especially when things like those membranes becoming permeable happens, or people get exposed to toxins, people have chronic stress, which a lot of people do, these microglia actually become activated and then start really damaging the brain. So one of the things that curcumin does is it actually helps to kind of attenuate and kind of dampen some of the microglia effect so that it's not being overreactive. So when they looked at curcumin, they actually saw that it could have a potential therapeutic value in prevention and treatment of neuroinflammation and also for neurodegenerative conditions. This also could be taken orally. One of the things that I always educate people on is curcumin, and your sourcing of curcumin is very important. because curcumin is one of those compounds that doesn't really absorb well when you take it orally. So when you take it, a lot of it gets metabolized by the liver and then doesn't become available as readily for the cells to take on. So it's important when you're looking at the sourcing to make sure that it's compounded in a certain way. And oftentimes, if it's formulated with things like black pepper extract, it actually absorbs better. There's actually sprays that bypass the gut that can be important too. And also, this can be taken intravenously through compounding pharmacies. There's also roles with things like the CBD molecules that are, the non-THC variety, and the cannabinoids that have been shown to actually help with immune balance. That when we're looking at things like the CBD that does not have THC in it, there's anti-inflammatory properties that has ability to decrease oxidative stress. It lowers the pro-inflammatory cytokines and actually works on the immune cells to make them more balanced and less reactive. So this particular study looked at Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and also blood vessel disease or atherosclerosis, and they found that there's a lot of warranting of future research to better understand how cannabinoids can be used in their therapeutic value. This is a very interesting one as we look at, okay, well, with this inflammation, this inflammaging process, how about the people that live to 100? Like, what's different about them? And so this study looked at these centenarians, and what they found is they actually did have high levels of some of these inflammatory markers, which is very interesting. But what they found is that their anti-inflammatory networks were very high. So they were able to buffer this inflammation. So they had higher amount of protective T cells, which help with infection and also help fight off viruses. They had higher amount of white blood cells. They had less tendency to be creating an immune response against their own cells. They had increased ability to create antibodies to different pathogens like viruses, bacteria. And they also had, again, intact intercellular junctions, right? So again, I told in the beginning that one of the hallmarks to health is, can your membrane stay intact? Whether it's brain, whether it's nervous system, whether it's blood vessel, whether it's gut. And when they looked at measurements of these people that are living to 100 and beyond in these blue zones, they actually had intact cell junctions. So very, very important part of keeping the processes from going too much in an inflammatory state. Another thing that we found is caloric restriction is very important for longevity. And one of the things we've known across species is that if we consume less calories across species, we tend to live longer. So they found that organisms, including non-human primates, were found through caloric restriction to actually have an extended lifespan. And they found the mechanisms, but a lot of them, you may want to write this one down, but a lot of research is being done on this molecule called mTOR. And mTOR is something that is upregulated in people who are aging faster, and it's downregulated in people who are aging slower. So by downregulation, it means that mTOR is actually not acting as readily. So things like fasting actually will downregulate mTOR. So that, these things like intermittent fasting, doing at least a 12-hour window between eating our last meal and our first meal, things like that are actually working on that mTOR molecule, which is very anti-inflammatory and helps with that inflammaging process. So another thing that they noted when people restrict calories, they had less inflammatory molecules floating around. These cells that were previously put in cell arrest were actually able to be cleaned out more easily. And when they did caloric restriction, they actually saw that these cells that need to be cleaned out were actually eliminated more readily, and it actually slowed progression of Alzheimer's. So you can see a pathway by which, if Americans are becoming kind of overfed and undernourished, how this can be leading to things like Alzheimer's numbers going up, diabetes numbers going up, and also cancer numbers going up. And this caloric restriction also does have evidence in terms of cancer prevention and also even improving outcomes in cancer to help integratively with the therapies. And that's one of the things that we do when we take care of people who have been diagnosed with cancer. we do help them with their eating programs. Obviously, things like chemotherapy can disrupt their appetite, and getting them onto a program that's lower calorie, but also getting high nutrient intake for what they are eating is very important to mitigate some of that stress and also help improve their outcomes. You may see a lot of the press and some of these longevity and kind of biohacking people talking about cold immersion. It's all across my feed when I'm looking at my social media platforms. So I thought I would touch upon this, but cold immersion is really this concept of getting into cold water, particularly 50 degrees or below, between like 37 to 52 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 3 minutes at a time. And what they found is that people that did this actually had lower oxidative stress markers. They had their insulin was actually working at a higher level, and they had improvements in some of their markers of lipids. They also did see that their active thyroid was higher. They had higher levels of white blood cell production, and they had better insulin sensitivity. They also noted that risk disease factors were showing improvement, and that there's a shift in fat metabolism that was happening where they're actually burning more fat. Now, what they found is that initially when people start doing this, they actually can get high blood pressure. So that's one of the things that I don't always recommend that somebody who's hypertensive and 65 years old just starts doing cold plunging. Might not be the best of strategies, but this is something that over time the ability to get acclimated to cold water can be improved, and obviously having things like your heart rate variability measured, your blood pressure being well controlled, and also monitoring these things before and after can be really helpful. And with that in mind too, there's a lot of research coming out with the opposite of this, which is more of the sauna therapies, actually looking at things like infrared sauna, which is going to higher temperatures, 120 degrees for like 20 minutes, and more of an infrared sauna environment. And one of the important things there is not only are we getting the infrared, which is working to kind of photobiomodulate some of the things like activating the cell energy, but also it's helping to improve detoxification to get rid of toxins. Things like the heavy metals that we're encountering in our freshwater fish, things like the toxins that we're encountering in the air are more readily expelled from the body through sweating. So some take-home steps: chronic low-grade inflammation plays a significant role in aging and age-related diseases. This inflammation can be caused by a variety of factors, including lifestyle, genetics, and exposure to environmental toxins. And by addressing these causes of inflammation, we may be able to slow down the aging process and reduce the risk of age-related diseases. So what we encourage and adopt a healthy lifestyle with regular exercise that's not too intense, but consistent. A balanced diet. Stress management techniques are very important to ward off inflammation and slow aging. Incorporating anti-inflammatory spices like turmeric, ginger, berries, leafy greens, and omega-3 rich foods. Identifying and addressing the medical contributions that can lead to inflammation, such as diabetes, early, obesity, autoimmune disorders, and treat them very aggressively and early. And we do know that we need more double-blinded randomized controlled trials to really legitimize the evidence-based nature of some of these therapies. And that's one of the things that we're really looking to really add to literature as part of the Marcus Institute, is that we're going to be really looking to show that things like omega-3s can be used in conjunction with integrative therapies to improve things like cardiovascular status, looking at things like curcumin and inflammation, and really getting studies designed that can show these in literature, so these can be better supported by payers, especially insurance companies in the future. And asking your doctors to monitor your inflammatory markers, things like high sensitivity CRP, your nutrient status, your vitamin D3, your vitamin D levels. Very important to really ask your practitioner to actually measure these things. And then really looking to see if there's abnormalities there, like what can be done and how you can use lifestyle, nutrients to improve these inflammatory markers. And these are my references, and I thank you very much for your time. I'm willing to have any questions that you may have. you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank
We have
you,
a few
Dr.
minutes.
Collins. Before we dive into the Q&A, I'm gonna drop a short survey in the chat. So if you guys can complete that, it takes like 1 minute. And then I can field questions because we have a lot in the chat. So I'll give everybody 1 minute to complete the survey. The recording, I am live streaming this. So for someone who asked if you can get a copy of the recording, it will be on our YouTube page. It's the YouTube page for the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice at FAU. Okay, so the first question I got was directly to me from Tootie Martin. What role can water fasting, time restricted eating, or 1 meal per day have on inflammaging, and which would you recommend?
It's a great question by Mr. Tootie Martin. Glad you're on the call. So there's very interesting research coming out with fasting, and I discussed in the caloric restriction portion. But time restricted eating can be very important because we need time for our bodies to be able to clear out and work to metabolize and extract the nutrients that we've eaten. And the previous theories of actually eating frequently and not allowing a lot of time, especially at least 12 hours in between our last meal and our first meal, can be very important to actually make it so that we're improving our ability to extract nutrients and also improving body composition and improving metabolism. And if you think back on just how why we're here today, a lot of it is because of our ancestral origins, right? So if you think about circadian rhythms, right? Hunter-gatherers were moving around during the day, and at nighttime, oftentimes we're sleeping, right? So that 12-hour circadian also plays a role in our dietary habits. And we do see that when people are more likely to be on shift work and eating at nighttime and eating at 2 a.m, heavy meals, and you start measuring their markers of stress and inflammation, they tend to be higher. And that's for multiple reasons. For water fasting, that's if you look at things like religious cultural religious things, water fasting actually has been done for years and years, and it's been done for a long time. Hydration is one of the most important aspects of detoxification. One of the things that I do caution with that, though, is what we're finding when we're really looking at people who do the best when they're fasting, is if they can get some kind of nutrient intake at all, it actually improves the cell cleanup. So there's particular programs that are out there, and I would encourage people to look at the fasting mimicking diet program, which actually is you're eating calories, but it's macroed in a way where you're fasting by day 2, you're considered fasting, you're actually in ketosis, but you're actually getting enough nutrients to help with that cell cleanup. And there's good literature coming out with improving inflammation with that, turning on cell survival genes, turning off cancer genes, and actually improving kind of the fat around the viscera, which is one of the hallmarks of health. So thanks for that question.
Okay, second question is from Catherine. I'm lunching on tuna right now, inspired by the Mediterranean diet and trying to incorporate its framework throughout my weekly menu. Question, you mentioned the metals/mercury in fish at the top of the presentation. What is your guidance for striking the right balance of fish intake, best types of fish to eat on a regular basis, and optimal frequency?
I love that question. It's really important because we're, in many ways, when we say things in medicine and even when we give recommendations, it seems like we're speaking on both sides, right? We're like, eat fish, but don't eat too much, right? If you eat fish, is it healthy or is it not healthy, right? And a lot of it happens in balance. And what I would encourage people to look into are the fish that are known to have higher levels of heavy metals, particularly mercury. Those tend to be larger fish that are around longer in the water, that live longer. Things like shark tend to be very high in heavy metals. Things like tuna tend to be very high in heavy metals. The fish that tends to be healthier, higher antioxidant, higher anti-inflammatory, tends to be the small fish like sardines. Things like that actually tend to be higher per unit than things like tuna. So in terms of really how often, it really does come down to very personalized. It's hard to make a general statement. It is important from a personalized standpoint that that's where measurement of heavy metals comes into play. And I'll give a caveat to that. Measuring for these heavy metals in blood is oftentimes not as ideal. Part of what happens with heavy metals is when we're acutely exposed, it's in our blood. But what ends up happening is these heavy metals end up getting reservoired in our tissue. So if we check in blood, the heavy metal's no longer there. It may actually be in our bone. So what do we do about it? So there's actually ways to do things like a sauna, and then you will measure something like heavy metals in the urine, and that can actually give you a better idea of what the body heavy metal burden may be. So that would be what I would encourage. But I do think, just a general summary, a smaller fish, really researching what fish are heavier in heavy metals. And for things like tuna, I would say if I made a general comment, less than a couple times a month, probably, for most people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Collins. We are just about out of time.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for being here, especially Dr. Collins. We gained valuable insights on the current evidence and strategies to reduce the effects of inflammation and embarked on a transformative journey toward a healthier, more vibrant you. Thank you again to Dr. Collins. We hope you'll all make plans to join us next week, same link, same date, and same time for our final installment in this year's, it's not our final installment. It's our third installment in this year's series. Next Wednesday at noon, when we'll talk with Ananda Nelson from the Sandler School of Social Work about an interesting topic, spiritual wellness, delving deeper. Until then, be well and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.